Joe, I'm a member of the Coalition for Nuclear Safety and an officer of Sierra Club, both in volunteer capacities. And we want to welcome you. And let me briefly introduce you, and then we're going to turn it over to you, and then maybe we'll do some Q&A after that. So Joseph Mangano has an MPH and an MBA, is an epidemiologist and executive director of Radiation and Public Health Project. His work on health hazards of nuclear reactions includes 39 peer-reviewed medical journal articles and 3 books, along with nearly 100 op-eds, letters to the editor, and articles on online publications. He directs a unique study of cancer risk using measurements of strontium-90 in 100,000 baby teeth collected by Washington University during the 1960s. And on a personal note, my folks, who were very tapped into the nuclear issue, stopped feeding me milk in the late 50s because the strontium-90 was concentrated in milk. So
you're not the first one I've heard that.
Yep. So this is historically pertinent, but it's very pertinent to our present concerns about nuclear waste being stored throughout the United States and certainly on the beach at San Onofre. So Joe, welcome and take it away.
Oh, thank you for that nice intro, and good afternoon, everybody, or good morning. I'm going to talk hopefully no more than 10-15 minutes, and then I'd really like to open the floor for questions and discussion. My topic is health studies near nuclear plants. And very often when I speak, it's about results. It's about cancer trends and patterns and so on. This one's going to be a little different because I'm going to be framing this in a political way, in a political framework, because as we all know, the issue of health risk from nuclear power is very, very much politicized. And that came from the beginning in the 1950s when nuclear reactors were first built. The Cold War mentality, which of course began with nuclear weapons, was passed along to the civilian uses of nuclear power. And as far as health was concerned, the regulators, which at the time was the Atomic Energy Commission, later the NRC, did a couple of things. In their regulations, they made no provision, there was no mandate to do any sort of studies of health near nuclear plants. And the other thing they did was they set what was called permissible limits, that they would require testing of levels of radioactivity and radioactive releases around the plant. If it fell below a certain level, the permissible limit, that was not just evidence that the plant can continue to operate, but to them, it was a check that health was not being affected at all. Unfortunately, this is really not very good science. With something as new and certainly with dangers as well known as radioactivity, studies had to be done, but the issue was rigged from the beginning. So for decades, nuclear reactors operated, and almost no studies were done. There were a few done of workers, health of workers, but none near nuclear power plants because they were run by private companies, private utilities, under no obligation to do studies and to share information with the public. We get to the 1980s, and that's when 2 of my colleagues, Jay Gould, a statistician, and Ernest Sternglass, a physicist, decided to create RPHP because of this great dearth of study. on the health issue. In the 1980s, a couple of things were going on. The 80s came right after the 1979 meltdown at 3 Mile Island, which was the worst accident among nuclear power reactors in the US. Maybe not of all reactors. You of course know about the Santa Susana plant, which were research reactors, and that terrible 1959 meltdown, which may have been worse. Anyway, in the 1980s, the 3 Mile accident was followed by a barrage of articles in medical and scientific journals, 32 of them, in fact, which addressed the mental health and stress-related issues caused by the 3 Mile accident. There were, for almost 12 years, there was not one single article published that actually showed how many cancers or how many infant deaths or whatever were near 3 Mile. And it was quite disturbing. Also in the 80s, there were the first that I know, and maybe there haven't been many more since, except for our work, 2 articles about cancer near nuclear plants in the US. One was 1983. A UCLA public health professor named James Enstrom did it, and he found that near the San Onofre plant, there was no evidence of any increased risk of cancer. It was published in the American Journal of Public Health. It was followed by a letter by Dr. Carl Johnson, who was a health director in Colorado, who criticized Enstrom's his methods that he used. Then, maybe more importantly, there was an article in 1987 by Richard Clapp from Boston University. He found that near the Pilgrim plant in Massachusetts, there was an elevated level of leukemia. And because this is in Massachusetts, that article got to the desk of Senator Edward Kennedy. And that prompted Kennedy to write a letter to the NIH director. And his letter, and I have copies of the letter and the response. Kennedy said it would be appropriate if the NIH could address the issue of a causal connection. And within 3 weeks, the NIH wrote back saying, we are conducting county-based cancer mortality studies from the 1950s to the early 1980s. And everybody, and I'm sure Senator Kennedy as well, was surprised. Like, oh, we didn't know. But obviously with Kennedy's position, they moved on it. This is the first, and to this day, the only published study by the federal government on cancer near nuclear plants. It was published in 1990, and very briefly, the conclusion was there is no connection between the opening of nuclear plants and increased local cancer rates. I've gone through that study many, many times. There are a number of places, including San Onofre, which showed an increase once the plant began operating. So it was at this point we decided to do our, to start the group. And since then we have produced, as Peter has told you, 38 medical journal articles. There's a 39th that's been approved. It hasn't quite been published yet, but will very shortly. Basically what we found in just a few words is that in most cases, in the county or counties closest to a plant, when it opens, the cancer rate compared to the US, which typically are roughly the same, goes up. I mean, the gap between the local and the national rate grows and grows. And I found this in numerous, at least a half a dozen cases. Number two, we've done studies showing that when you close the opposite, when you close a nuclear plant, that immediately there are sharp declines in local infant mortality and local cancer rates in children under the age of 5, and longer term drops in cancer among all ages. So which is well received, because we're concerned that we're doomed with the nuclear plant. No, if closing plants is a benefit to public health. And finally, the thing that we're probably most noted for is the baby tooth study. Again, the regulations are weak. There are no requirements that the government should study levels of radiation in bodies, but we have done the only such study and are in the process of expanding it. We've looked at over 5,000 teeth in children living near to and far from nuclear plants. We found higher levels in the ones that live close. We've found that they're rising over time. We found that there's a connection with childhood cancer. When one goes up, the other goes up, and one goes down, the other goes down. So, and as you heard, we are taking this study to a second level, where we're going to compare the strontium-90 in teeth of children living in nuclear plants. The first one will be the Fermi plant near Detroit. We're going to compare them with teeth from people who gave teeth in the 1960 study, people who were exposed to bomb fallout early in life. We're going to ask the question, what was greater? The people born in the 50s and the 60s who got bomb testing fallout early in life, or today's children who are getting reactor emissions early in life? No one's addressed that. We're going to find out. So I hope I made my 10-minute or 15-minute goal here, but I'm going to stop, and I think this is a good time to just open things up for comments and questions, which I'll be very glad to answer.
All right, comments and questions. Ellie.
I was wondering, do you take into account, and I'm sure you do, that cancer takes decades to develop? It can be years, it can be decades. Is that part of the study as well?
Yes, that's a very good point. People think that, you're exposed to radiation and cancer occurs in the next year. No, it can be decades. You're absolutely right. And as I described to you, very often we see when a nuclear plant opens and the cancer rate, which may have been the same as the national rate or even below it, for the first, few years, 5 years or so, there really is not much change. But after about 5 years or so, up it goes, and the gap gets greater and greater over time, 20 years later, 25 years later. So the answer is yes, that is a key point.
Joe, is the national rate your most appropriate comparison variable? Because it could be that many other things, such as radon or industrial waste or whatever, could contaminate that. How about, have you entertained using a comparison group that is free from those other exogenous sources of carcinogens?
Very good question. And even if you kick politics out of it and make it, a serious study, it's choosing a control or an unexposed group is tricky. Now, the U.S. rate is really a very quick and convenient way to do it. Most of the U.S. is not close to nuclear reactors. However, we are a cancerous society. Okay, 40% of us are going to be diagnosed sometime in our lives, and more will have it and not be diagnosed. So that's not always, it's a start, but it's not always the greatest way. Another way to do it is to try to find, if you're say you're doing a county, to find control counties in the same state that were not exposed, counties that are the same in terms of demographics, the racial composition, the age breakdown, and so on, poverty and unemployment and issues like that. In the 1990 NCI study, National Cancer Institute study I mentioned, they did pick control counties. For example, San Onofre, which is the one I know you're most interested in. The study counties, the closest counties were San Diego and Orange. They picked 3 control counties: Ventura, San Bernardino, and Santa Barbara. Now, I know it's a tough thing to do, but Santa Barbara is very close to the Diablo Canyon, the nuclear reactor, and downwind. And Ventura County is the location of
Santa Susana.
Santa Susana. Now, you know, maybe the maybe the age, race, and sex distribution was the same, but as far as, you know, a nuked area versus a non-nuked area, I have great concerns about that. So the answer is, yeah, it's tricky. But the best way to do it is try to find a similar county in the same state.
Okay,
You know,
thank
one
you.
of the problems with that study is that in the same county, like in Orange County, they counted not Riverside, Fullerton, which is 40 miles away, and San Clemente, which is 2 miles away. They counted them the same because they're in the same county. They didn't use distance. They used political boundaries. That was a terrible flaw in that study.
Yeah, and you know, again, but I appreciate it's a tough thing to do, and that's why we have done studies like what happens before and after a nuclear plant operates in an area, or after one closes. All right, you have your control, okay, before a plant opens. You know, it's not operating, it's not emitting radiation. After, it is. So we have used that quite a bit because of the difficulties in finding a real control.
Nancy has a question. Go ahead, Nancy.
Hi, just to follow up on the fact that cancer it takes a while before it develops. You said that after plants close, that the cancer rate goes down. I'm hopeful because a new point just closed, but how long does that take?
Well, Nancy, we've done 2 sets of studies. The first one was we looked the first 2 years after a nuclear plant closes compared to the 2 years before. And we looked specifically at the youngest, you know, the infant mortality, you know, children who die in the first year of life. And we looked at cancer that was diagnosed in children 4 years and younger. And that's where we found, we looked at 8 plants which closed during the 1990s. And we found that in every single case, there was a sharp decline in both infant deaths and child cancer cases in the counties closest to the plant. Now, as far as the longer term effects, we did an article about 10 years ago. We looked at the Rancho Seco plant, which is just outside Sacramento. We've done a lot of California work, as you can see. And we looked at the local cancer rates, you know, just before Rancho Seco stopped operating and over the following 20 years. And we found as time went on, the gap between the county rate and the state rate closed and the county rate became lower. We estimated in 20 years, 4,400 fewer people developed cancer, as opposed to if the, you know, pre-shutdown levels had continued. So yeah, there is certainly evidence. And again, these are all published in peer-reviewed journal articles.
And just, do you know about how long after exposure, what's the normal for cancer after exposure? Is there any normal?
It varies, you know. I mean, sometimes it's quick. It's you know, in the following few years, but again, it can go decades. I mean, they're still doing studies on the survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, which are now 77 years in the past, and they're still finding new cases of cancer at higher rates than expected. So it could go decades.
Sarah.
I just have a general question. What are you experiencing as the impediments to getting this information out? It looks like you have such valuable information about the impact of nuclear plants when they're built and when they go away. What are you experiencing as the impediments to getting this out so the public gets it?
The impediments are, I hate to say it, we are a relatively small group, like many nonprofit charities. And we are strongly dependent on contributions from individuals and from some foundations that see the importance of this. We get no government money whatsoever. Most research in this country is funded by the NIH, the government. As you can see, they're in no hurry to part with a dime to allow this research to be done by an independent group like ours. Okay, and that's also why you don't see much coming from university-based professors. They're all intelligent. They all are experienced in research, and they understand that radioactivity is dangerous, but they dare not do this because there is a history of esteemed academicians and researchers taking a huge political hit for doing studies that show that there is a cause and effect. And I'll quickly give an example. It was the original example because back in the 1950s, a British physician from Oxford University, Alice Stewart, was given the assignment to take a look at the childhood leukemia in England and find any kind of patterns. And she looked through the data and she found nothing, but she found one thing that was odd. She found that of children whose mother had a pelvic X-ray during the pregnancy had a much higher chance of developing cancer by age 10. It was like a 10 times higher chance. And she published this, Lancet in the British Medical Journal, and she was absolutely chopped to bits by the scientific community as well as government, of course, that this couldn't possibly happen. The levels were too small because, this was something that physicians did in those days as a routine, just as a diagnostic tool, just to see how big the child was before birth and where the feet were and where the head was. They would do an X-ray. Now, when you hear that story, we're horrified. Like, my God, we would never do that. We do ultrasound, with no radiation. But it turns out that after years of fighting and continued use of pelvic X-rays, they finally gave up and said, you know what, we have ultrasound, we can do ultrasound. But it took more than 20 years to make that change. So that is our biggest obstacle. Okay.
Roger, you have a question.
Good morning, Joe, and we all owe you a debt of gratitude for the work you've been doing, not just recently, but for decades and decades.
Thanks, Roger.
And please keep it up. I have a question. I think one of the biggest shots that we have for this whole issue is with the National Academy of Science study, which is now stalled. And it was defunded by the NRC in 2016. And now, thanks to Mike Levin and Katie Porter and some others, it is funded. And now it's blocked by HHS. And I'm wondering, is this Secretary Becerra personally, or who's leaning on Becerra? Is it Biden? Is it Department of Energy? Is it Department of Defense? And who is blocking this? This is a long reach of the nuclear industry. I'm wondering if you have any connections or inside information. Do you talk to Oliver Edelson and Mike Levin's staff? He's intimately involved with this, and they're going to have a workshop sometime in the spring and talk about it some more. He says there's not enough known. It's premature to do a study. That's what they said. That's totally ridiculous. The study's been proposed for over a decade. But I don't know, do you have any inside information? Please share it with us in the future months if you do. Thank you.
You know, I purposely didn't bring this up in my talk because I knew you were going to, Roger. So, so thank you. For those that don't know, very quickly, after that 1990 National Cancer Institute study, there have been no more federal studies of cancer near nukes. However, in 2009, out of the blue, I think everyone was surprised, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission announced we have given a no-bid contract to Oak Ridge Associated Universities in Tennessee to do a study of cancer near nuclear plants. I mean, everyone was surprised, but once the shock wore off, the immediate response was, first of all, Oak Ridge is a weapons defense town. Okay, that and Hanford and Los Alamos were the three plants where they made the original atomic bomb and have continued nuclear weapons work since. They can't possibly be objective. And a big stink was raised. Oak Ridge was quickly withdrawn, and another no-bid contract given to the National Academy of Sciences. And after 6 years and $10 million, I think my figures are roughly right, the NRC decided to scrap it, to terminate the study. I think the key point here is the NRC has no business being involved in commissioning health studies. Okay, they have proven from time and time again, and even before they came around when the Atomic Energy Commission was regulating plants, that they are biased in terms of the plants. In fact, most commissioners at the NRC are former workers, are former engineers and physicists at nuclear plants who, after their stint at the NRC, are going to go back. Okay, they can't possibly object. And then they also are not health researchers. You understand that. Again, I think that Roger, I don't know the details of what, you know, those people you mentioned of what they're doing and the chances of getting studies. But to hear, like you said, that HHS is blocking a reopening of this study, biased though it might be, is just more evidence that we can't get any good information from the government. It's got to come from independent sources, such as our group. Any thoughts on that, Roger, or others?
Well, I think you can trust the National Academy of Sciences. They're theoretically independent and have a long track record. What I'm wondering is who's blocking it. And there's got to be, somebody knows this is widespread, and I assume it's the Department of Energy.
That would be my guess as well.
Touring the country, promoting nuclear energy, and to keep calling it clean and reliable and cheap, and just lies like that all the time. And she does that. Department of Defense doesn't do that, but I'm sure they're a big factor too. And
Yeah.
I would guess, you know, I'm tempted to write to Jill Biden if I could ever find how to write to her. And because I think Biden probably does what he's told, and the pressure is on to, we need to have an answer to the whole climate change problem and the whole energy problem, and nuclear is the solution. And I think this is a very dangerous trend that's going around. Nuclear is the solution. And we got to stop this. So somebody's got to find out why Becerra and HHS is blocking this study. They have the money, it's ready to go.
Yeah, well, we know that they have obstructed this kind of work for a long time. And now, most recently, they have, because of the effort to address climate change with safer forms of electricity, they have somehow taken the word nuclear and put the prefix emission-free in front of it. You know, because nuclear plants don't release greenhouse gases. First of all, they do release greenhouse gases to some extent. Second of all, the process of getting going from uranium in the ground to a nuclear power plant involves multiple steps, all of which are very filthy and all of which release huge amounts of greenhouse gases. So
And they never talk about, that. The front
never.
end,
They
the back
and-
end, they ignore it.
And they've been able to take that and parlay it into bailout fund monies from numerous states, New York, New Jersey, Illinois and Connecticut, and now California, regardless of which party the governor is and all. And these states pass bills addressing climate change, and most of the money that comes up is given to nuclear companies. In New York, over 10 years, 7.6 billion, and in New Jersey, another billion, and in California, 1.5 billion. It's just crazy. And now, of course, the federal government with its, with the, I forget, it's either the Inflation Reduction Act or the infrastructure bill, has put in lots of financial goodies for nuclear plant, which is going to make our work harder, but that just means we have to.
Ellie, you
Well,
have your
another,
hand up?
could I just add one more thing? The other big
Sure.
thing,
Go ahead. Ellie, you're muted.
Are
Is-
you measuring exposure to nuclear waste dumps as well?
No, we haven't been able to. We're a small group and we're limited as to what we can do. We're most concerned with the actual releases, routine releases from nuclear plants when they're operating, and how much gets in the body, the strontium-90 in the baby teeth, and what the changes in rates of local cancer and other diseases occur. That keeps us more than occupied. But we would love to get to waste. That's another enormous issue.
Yep. Thank you.
Diane? And if Diane,
Hello, hi, yes, sorry. Hi, Joe. I was going to ask about, I don't know if you have any information regarding, as you know, here at Holtec is planning to dump over 1 million gallons of radioactive water from the spent fuel pool. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, don't do it. It
Yeah.
is just almost hard to believe that something like this would be contemplated. Excuse me. And again, the point I'll make here is that unless people, put in an enormous, grassroots effort to stop this, the government officials in charge are going to let it happen. The NRC is going to let it happen. The State Radiological Safety Bureau will let it happen. In a way, not that I don't blame the nuclear companies or Holtec for doing what they're doing. They're private companies earn a living trying to live within the regulations. It's the regulators that are the issue here. We put our trust in them to keep people safe, okay? And they're not. And we've had a long history that they haven't been. So that's my comment.
Michelle and then Bart.
Hey, Michelle.
So I just want to do a shout out to Joe on the fact that he's one of the people that helped close Indian Point, New York. And back when after 9/11, when the Indian Point issue really reared its head because of the attack, and Entergy was gearing up for relicensing, the Westchester County Board of Legislators commissioned Joe and our PHP to do a study on cancer in the Indian Point area, and he did an excellent study. And he looked at Indian Point is really sort of right near three different counties are within a few miles. So he looked at did a comparison with those counties and with other areas of New York, as well as with national cancer incidents. And the findings were actually staggering. I mean, it wasn't just like, oh, another 5% more. It was like some forms of cancer was in the 70% grade, or I think one of them, I don't remember which off the top of my head, maybe childhood leukemia was like 90% higher. I mean, the numbers were incredible. So the industry, of course, came out with its PR, but this is what was so telling. So Entergy was at that point an $11 billion company that was still making a lot of profit from Indian Point. They did not go against the findings at all. And that is really what the telling point is. If you have a lot of money and you can and damaging information comes out that could literally stop your cash flow, you're going to fight it the best you can. They didn't even try. So I just wanted to let folks know about that.
You know, the line we always, thank you for those nice words, Michelle, it was fun. It was very rewarding seeing Indian Point close. We and many others did a lot of hard work. The comment I'll make here is that we always say, you know what, please do studies and please show evidence, show proof that nuclear plants are safe. All right, rather than just saying your study is wrong and everything is fine just because, you know, releases are below a certain level is not enough. But that's the way the game is played. They want to play it out on political and PR terms rather than on evidence.
Hey, Bart, you're next.
Oh, speaking of PR, Joe, this is a copy of your book. So everyone can, you know, help support you by buying a copy and reading it. I have a copy. It looks too new. I should have been reading it. Then thank you very much for coming. And I have a quick question. I want to thank Ace and stuff for all the work he did to help launch this. But oh yeah, do you look at different kinds of cancers? I mean, I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but there are all these cancers. I know leukemia is a primary one. And then the second question is, anyone you know has looked at cardiovascular disease? Because I remember Kate Brown was always talking about heart disease, cardiovascular disease. I don't want to get into the weeds, but thanks a lot.
Again, I'd like to be a larger group, Bart, so we can have somebody looking at each type of cancer. The answer is we have done studies, not just of all cancers combined, but of particular cancers that are known to be sensitive to radiation. And the two I'm going to call out, aside from leukemia, which you mentioned, are child cancer and thyroid cancer. We know that a dose of radiation absorbed by a fetus or an infant or a young child is far more dangerous than that same dose to an adult, a fully grown adult. Okay, and really, of all the studies of radiation, of all types of radiation, child cancer is the most popular one. They're kind of the canary birds. If you see an increase in child cancer in an area that's been exposed, that's strong evidence. The other one I'm going to point out is thyroid cancer. Now, thyroid cancer is not a very high-profile cancer. It's not that common, not nearly as common as lung or breast or colorectal. And it is generally most treatable, although every case is you know, grueling and awful, and some do die. No, if you go to the on Google and if you look at the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic for the thyroid cancer, they're going to say, what are the factors behind thyroid cancer? If you've had a previous thyroid disease, all right. If there's a family history of thyroid cancer, okay. And the list quickly ends with exposure to ionizing radiation, specifically radioactive iodine, which is one of the many different chemicals that nuclear weapons and plants produce. We found some bad thyroid cancer results, and the one I'll point out is what Michelle was talking about near Indian Point. In the 1970s, as they were building these two large new nuclear reactors at Indian Point, the 4-county thyroid cancer rate was below New York State. I don't know, it was like oh goodness, 20% below or something. And within 30 years, it was 50% higher. I mean, it just staggering. It was going up. It's gone up everywhere in this country, but near Indian Point, it was overwhelming. It was overwhelming. So yes, those are the two that we try to pinpoint as best we can. Oh, and I'm sorry, and the heart disease part, excellent question. It's not just cancer. Radiation does a number on the entire body and affects not just cancer, but other diseases. After the Chernobyl meltdown, years later in 2009, there was a book published by Alexei Yablokov and his colleagues. And the editor was one of our major colleagues, Dr. Janet Sherman. She edited Yablokov's book. This book consisted of 5,000 articles that had never been published before, mostly, and were in Russian, in the Russian language. They found that near Chernobyl, in Belarus and in the Ukraine, yes, there were all sorts of increases in different types of cancer, but there were increases in heart disease and in digestive diseases and in lung disease, respiratory diseases, and on and on and on. It did a number on everything, okay? The final thing I'll say about heart disease is there was another great, mentor and inspiration to, I think, all of us, Dr. John Goffman, who worked on the original Manhattan Project for the original atomic bombs. Later on in his life, he turned his attention to cardiovascular disease and radiation, and he's not that as well known for it as his previous work, opposing bombs and reactors. But suffice it to say, yes, it's a major cause, can be a major cause of heart disease.
Ace Hoffman, your hand's up.
I just wanted to mention that I was sent a pre-publication copy of that book and made corrections throughout because there was a lot of typos and a lot of poor translations from metric to others, et cetera, a lot of errors in it. But it was absolutely overwhelming what its message was. You just could not deny it in any way, shape, or form. It was amazing. Unfortunately, I didn't get the changes in time. When I sent them in, she was like, "Oh, it's too late," by a week or so. But what a book!
Yeah, I mean, look, that area, not a tiny area, but a larger one, when before the meltdown, went from 20% of children were unhealthy and 80% healthy to just the opposite. 80% had some major condition and only 20% had escaped. I mean, it's just staggering.
Well, Joe has been very generous with his time. Do we have time for a couple more questions, Joe?
Yeah, I have to drop off in about within 5 minutes.
All right. Allie, you got a question? Oh, you're muted.
Are some people more resistant to radiation than others?
I'm sure they are.
Thank you.
What makes you resistant?
Being male.
Yeah, I think it's probably, I don't know, I don't think anyone knows, but I think it's probably that list of basic things your doctor tells you, eat a good healthy diet, get exercise, and get plenty of sleep and have low stress, and hopefully have good genetics. Yeah, some seem to not be effective nearly as much.
Well, the reason I was asking, I had over 5,000 rads. I have my my records as a child to shrink my adenoids. And the outcome was I do have a benign, so far, thank you, tumor in my sinus. So I don't have very much sinus, but they said that's what it's from. And I also had the pelvic x-rays when I was pregnant with my first child. But so far, I shouldn't say anything, knock on wood.
Well, in public health, we talk about risk. It's not like a guarantee that it's going to harm someone, but we look at a population basis. Over large groups of people, will it cause more harm than if it hadn't been exposure?
I'm going to take two more quick questions. Susanna Golden and then Daryl
Thank you. Thank you, Joe, for everything you do. For those
And
of
you
us
do.
here at Indian Point, dealing with this issue of Holtec's desire to dump all of the spent fuel pool water into the Hudson River that supplies upstream 7 communities with their drinking water, and Paul Blanche having confirmed that there is nothing that can be done about it. Donna Gilmore feels that only leaving the spent fuel pools open with the water in it is the way to store it. But of course, they're not going to go along with the millions of dollars a year to keep the pools open. What is your advice to us? We were hoping that we could store it, we could ask for it to be stored in tanks on site instead of dumping it. But is that not a viable thing to ask for? Will there be corrosive elements in it that will eat through the tanks in time? We can't seem to get anywhere with this issue. If you could shed any light, I'd appreciate it.
I wish I had an answer. I don't think there is a good one, but I will say that anything has got to be better than introducing large new amounts of radioactivity into an active source such as the Hudson River. That is just wrong. You know, keeping it in pools and in dry casks and all is a challenge enough. But at least it's not directly circulating, at least so far, into the biosphere.
Okay, I've got Daryl as the final question.
Hi, thank you very much, Joe, for this very enlightening and very depressing extra group
Yes.
glob of information. I was just reminded through your talks when you were talking about the nuclear industry in terms of nuclear weapons. There was a book, and it's probably at least 15 years old, and maybe somebody else has either read it or heard of it. And I think it was called something like the Clan of One-Breasted Women. And there's a whole town somewhere, either in Nevada, New Mexico, where almost all the women have breast cancer because they were so near the site of the nuclear bomb tests. And I was just wondering if anybody else have heard of this book or know of it. And I'm going to try to research where this book is, because it was just, the people just so matter-of-factly felt like, well, this just happens because we needed it for our defense.
Well, I've heard of the book. I've not read it. If you do come up with it, you through perhaps Bart could let me know. I'd be interested in seeing what it's about. Yeah, but that's just typical of the. I'm not going to blame people for saying, oh well, that's cancer is in our society. No, I point the finger directly at our leaders who know better and need, or not need to, but are obligated to protect our people from health hazards, especially one as dangerous as this. Is really, arguably, these are the most dangerous chemicals on the planet.
Hey, Joe, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us, and thanks for people from both San Diego and Orange County and others across the country that have joined us for today's Zoom. It's been quite enlightening, and we greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. This was great.
So I'm going to turn it back to Liz and our moderator for a few final words. There she is. You're muted. Liz, you're muted. I'm going to get a shirt. Instead of saying Sierra Club, it says you're muted.
I'm mute. I'm okay now, right?
You're okay.
So thank you very much. This was that was terrific. Are there any final reflections or comments before we sign off? And when's our next meeting? Does anybody remember? 2 weeks from now? If anybody wants to join us, let us know.
Thank you so much.
I
Great.
think we should not be in sync with the national meeting, which I
Okay.
believe it meets in 2 weeks too.
Okay, we'll have to
Every
work
other
on that.
week.
James? You have your hand up? Well, I'm okay. I guess
Okay,
that's
sorry. This is Mary Beth, and I just wanted to say that Terry Tempest Williams
is the
wrote,
author.
wrote The Clan of the One-Breasted Women. And
Yeah.
it's about her family in Utah, downwinders.
We've got it if anybody wants to borrow it. So is that it?
And thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Totally.
This was great. One of the best.
Bravo.
in a
Thank
long
you.
time.
See you next time. We'll figure out how to not conflict with the national meeting. Okay. So long, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Happy New
Thank you.
Year.
Yeah.
It was good.
Mhm.
One of the most depressing meetings in a while. Wow. I think I'll go cry first
Okay.
before I move on with my day,
I'm sorry.
but necessary.
Okay, everybody, let's go. Stephen, does anybody have anything else? Okay, we're out. I'm leaving. Leave meeting.